Welcome back. It's been a turbulent week in Northern Ireland. The Democratic Unionist Party continued to block the revival of the Executive and the Assembly in protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. That protocol was agreed during Brexit negotiations between the European Union and the United Kingdom to ensure that there would be no new checks on goods crossing the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It aims to avoid a hard border between the two, to maintain the integrity of the European Union single market and to facilitate unfettered access for Northern Ireland goods into Great Britain. Unionists complain that it has introduced a border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. A deadline to restore devolved government passed without any resolution, which means that an election will be held within the next 12 weeks. Ben Habib is a former Brexit MEP and is part of a group that has brought a legal action against the United Kingdom government to declare the Northern Ireland Protocol illegal. Welcome to GBNews.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Good morning. Why would it be illegal?
Well, in a sense, it's already proven to be illegal. The High Court in Belfast and the Appeals Court after that adjudged the Northern Ireland Protocol to have breached, and in the case of the Appeals Court, subjugated the Act of Union. And the Act of Union, if you like, in the late Lord Trimble's own words, the Act of Union is the Union. It is the instrument by which the United Kingdom was created. So, by its very fundamental nature, it has broken a constitutional act of Parliament, which I argue, and my co-litigants argue, is not permitted to Parliament. At least it's not permitted to Parliament to do impliedly, by mistake, which is what the government's lawyers are arguing. They're saying the Withdrawal Agreement Act, which was the Act of Parliament that gave Parliament and the government the authority to sign the Northern Ireland Protocol, impliedly set aside the Act of Union. And we say that simply does not hold true. You can't impliedly set aside a constitutional act of that nature.
So if I've understood you, you've had two decisions in your favour, but the legal action goes on. There must be another level of decision to be made.
They have, peculiarly, Michael, they haven't been in our favour. What they've said is the Act of Union has been breached, or in the Appeals Court case, the subjugated, but it's been done legally. And so we've had to appeal that. We're also fighting on the grounds that the Northern Ireland Protocol breaches the Belfast Agreement, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, because it foists on Northern Ireland a new constitutional arrangement without cross-community consent, which is an inherent foundational aspect of the Good Friday Agreement. Cross-community consent basically means that both nationalists and unionists in Stormont have to give their consent to a change to a legislative item before it can be imposed on Northern Ireland. And that was set aside by government, actually using a statutory instrument with which I'm sure you're familiar, perhaps viewers won't be, but that's an instrument that government can use outside of Parliament, outside of Parliament's blessing. So we argue the government's actually gone beyond its remit. It's tinkered with the Good Friday Agreement in order to force this protocol onto the people of Northern Ireland.
I would guess that the argument against you is that there has been no constitutional change, that the introduction of checks on goods passing between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in this context does not represent a constitutional change. It represents a change of practice, and some people may like it and some people may dislike it. And I think the other argument that people would make, perhaps, is that this is not in breach of the Good Friday Agreement because the third strand of the Good Friday Agreement, which talks about the East-West dimension, refers to the relationship between the island of Ireland and Great Britain. It's a broad context of East-West relations. It's not limited to Northern Ireland's relationship with Great Britain. These are complex matters, but do you want to unpick that?
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree on both fronts, obviously.
Of course.
On your first point about this not being a constitutional change, it is without doubt a constitutional change. Northern Ireland is subject to something like 3,000 regulations and laws made in Brussels and adjudicated by the European Court of Justice. So we have a foreign power making laws in Northern Ireland. It is effectively taxation without representation. It goes back to the very heart of democracy. People of Northern Ireland don't have a say in the institution which is making laws for them. So it is utterly a new constitutional arrangement for Northern Ireland, and one that is it's another one of the arguments we're making, actually breaches their human rights. I
mean, to some extent, that would only be true if all of our human rights were being breached during the period that we were in the European Union.
No, but we had representation in the European Union when we were members of the EU. Northern Ireland has no mechanism to influence the laws that are now being foisted on it. And that is a breach of human rights. Whether or not the Supreme Court will agree with us, that's one of the cases, one of the arguments we're making. And then on the East-West dimension, I completely agree. The East-West dimension has to be taken in balance with the North-South dimension. But what's happened with the protocol, the North-South dimension being between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland?
Thank you, yes.
What's happened with the protocol is that it acknowledges the need to protect the Good Friday Agreement. It claims that to put a customs border on the island of Ireland would be a hard border. And then it moves seamlessly to putting that same hard border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, making us the first country, I think in history, Michael, to partition itself without a plebiscite and without a single shot being fired. And I'm not trying to be evocative by using that latter phraseology. But that's what's happened. Normally, countries get partitioned either because they peacefully decide they're going to do it and they have a referendum, or there's a war or some kind of insurgency which forces the issue. But what we've got here, I think, and I say this advisedly, is a complete collapse in political will at Westminster to do what its very basic function is, which is to protect the fabric of the United Kingdom. The Westminster, including Brexiteers like Chris Eaton-Harris, who's now Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and Steve Baker, who's Minister of State for Northern Ireland, have turned their back on the protection of the country in favour of the easier route of appeasement of the EU and appeasement of the Republic of Ireland. And it actually sickens me. I don't want to get too emotional on the programme, but it sickens me to see how our politicians are prepared to step aside while this massive act of constitutional vandalism happens under their watch.
Well, what has happened many times before in history, in this respect, that a British government has made a policy decision without thinking about Ireland. So we got into Brexit.
With that, I wholly agree,
yes,
by the way.
Without thinking about what the consequence is going to be for Ireland. History, I think, is probably not moving your way. I mean, I sense that the United Kingdom government and the Irish are moving closer together, which will probably mean that with the intervention of the United States as well, the European Union would move too. It seems to be quite likely there's going to be a compromise on this. And the compromise, I suppose, would allow a lot of trade that was moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland to move in a way that was unhindered. And then lots of people at that point would probably relax, because what matters to them is, whether the cornflakes are reaching their Tesco's or not. They're not so concerned about the constitutional matters as you are.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. I think, we have a very difficult uphill battle, and it's not helpful, for example, Eaton-Harris calling another election in Northern Ireland, because what he's forcing the DUP and the traditional unionist voice, who are another powerful promoter of unionism, what he's forcing them to do is to fight the battle that Westminster should be fighting. So they come across as naysayers. They come across as people who are keeping devolved government, failing to restore devolved government, bringing it down, being naysayers, being negative. And they're only doing that because they're having to fight for unionism. So I think you're quite right, Michael. The tide is against us. Westminster is against us. Unionism is under threat. But what I think the politicians don't really fully get, and I've got nothing to do with, I've got no greater love for Northern Ireland than I have of any other part of the United Kingdom. What the politicians are forgetting is that Scotland will take its lead from Northern Ireland. And if they think they can sort of stop the leak in the dam, as it were, with Northern Ireland, reach a compromise there and move on, they're sadly mistaken. The Republic of Ireland will not stop, and the SNP in Scotland will take its lead from Northern Ireland and be encouraged by the weakness at Westminster. So I think what we're beginning to see, because of this political weakness in Westminster, and I don't think this had to be the way it's turned out, is potentially the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom.